Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theatre Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and Robin Hood Radio's very own critic. We're happy about that. He joins us weekly. The films are Invisible Life, Beanpole, and Incitement. Much as I would like to start my novel with these terms, I will instead ask you, which one did you like the best?
Well, you will find that out. Actually, all three of them are good movies, and every one is very, very well worth seeing for sure. They also come from three different countries. So let us begin with Invisible Life, which is primarily a Brazilian production, and it deals with a couple of young women who are sisters. And they come from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and they are young women when we first meet them, and they are very close to each other, and they both have kind of different aims in life. One of them mainly wants to fall in love and have a sort of a conventional, happy home life, but the other, and her name is Guida, the other one, whose name is Eurydice, wants to become a concert pianist, and she dreams of going off to a conservatory and polishing her skills and becoming a famed pianist and doing what she loves most in life. What happens, however, is that the one who has always dreamed of love finds what she believes is love, even though her family strongly disapproves of this young man, and she runs off with him. She goes abroad with this young man, much to the dissatisfaction and extreme unhappiness of the parents, who are quite conservative in a lot of ways. And wouldn't you know, the man turns out to be an awful, awful, awful character, and this is still very near the beginning of the movie. The poor young woman, poor Guida, comes back home. She never even got to manage to marry the guy, and she's now pregnant and without a husband or a mate, and back home. And the mother welcomes her into the home and says, "Oh, you poor dear, this is terrible." But the father refuses to forgive her for having run off and banishes her from the house. And so she has to go off and find her own way, which is extremely difficult. And so she is living and just doing all kinds of very unfortunate things in order to keep soul and body together. In the meantime, Eurydice, who is still home, is practicing the piano and dreaming of going off to the conservatory, but it doesn't look like maybe that's going to happen either. Now, what happens is, and the sort of thrust of this movie, is that the two sisters are separated throughout the entire movie. They do not even realize that they are both, in fact, in Rio de Janeiro because of a lie that the father told. Guida believes that Eurydice has gone off to Austria. This is actually a German-Brazilian co-production, and so a little German-speaking comes into this. Believes that she has gone off to Austria and is studying at the conservatory, which is not true. And so the two sisters are separated, but they are constantly thinking of each other. And in fact, the closest and most enduring relationship in the movie is between the two sisters, who truly care for each other and truly each longs for the other's presence. Little do they realize how close they really are. In fact, they think that they are very far apart, and that is how pretty much the whole movie transpires, of these two young women, each finding her own way in very different manners, and each dreaming of being reunited with the other and not realizing how close the other actually is. The main thing to know about Invisible Life, which, by the way, was made by Karim Aynouz, the main thing to know about it is that it is a very, very lush, well-produced, gorgeous-looking melodrama, and it's a melodrama in every sense of the word. Melodramas are dramas in which the emotions are heightened. I always describe melodramas as sort of dramas in italics, and that is the way Invisible Life transpires. It is gorgeous-looking. It is full of lush music and lush views and lush acting, and all the emotions are pushed to the high point. So if that's not the kind of movie that you like, if you prefer your movies to be subtle and understated, then Invisible Life is probably not for you. But if you want a movie where things are really a sort of over-the-topness pervades the whole movie, I found it very, very watchable. It's a very beautiful movie, very well-acted movie, and I just had a terrific time with it. I can appreciate the old-fashioned melodrama when I know that's what I'm getting into, and this is a very, very good specimen of that breed. Turning now to Beanpole, which is a very different movie, and as you can tell from the title, Beanpole, this is not an over-the-top melodrama. This is a Russian film made by Kantemir Balagov, who also co-wrote it, and the original title of the movie is Dilda, which is actually just the nickname of one of the main characters, whose first name is Iya, and the movie focuses primarily on Iya, also known as Dilda or Beanpole, because she is tall and thin and blonde, so that's why she's nicknamed Beanpole, and the other young woman whose name is Masha. And this is a movie where you have to sort of figure out how the strands of the story are coming together at the beginning, because at first it appears to be something sort of different than it was than it seemed before. We have this young woman, Masha, comes into the life of Beanpole, and Beanpole, we learn right at the beginning, is a very eccentric young woman. In fact, she's more than eccentric. She appears to have a sort of a mental disturbance every once in a while, and this is what happens at the very beginning of the movie, so you know this from the get-go. Every once in a while, she sort of freezes up mentally and physically. She becomes kind of catatonic. She never knows when this is going to come on. All of a sudden, when she seems to be having a normal interchange with somebody, she is just staring into space, apparently unable to hear, certainly unable to speak, and she's just that way for a while. And then after a while, the fit passes, and she returns back to her sort of normal state again. So she is an unusual person with this disability. She also has a very, very young child, and you wonder, well, now, how is she going to be able to properly care for this young child when she has this disability? Moreover, the whole story is taking place in 1945, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, in the city of Leningrad, which was how the city was then known. And the siege of Leningrad has just ended, so everybody is in a miserable and abnormal state. So it is in this situation that we meet Iya, and then Masha comes into her life, and Masha is a young woman who is returning from the war itself. And we find out quite early in the movie, to our surprise, that Masha is the actual mother of the young child who Iya has been taking care of. However, something extremely tragic then happens involving the young child and involving Iya's disability. And the rest of the movie plays out the relationship between Iya and Masha as various things happen to them, and they interact with various other people in the aftermath of World War II and the siege of Leningrad, in the aftermath of this tragedy that has struck the young child, and as the two of them try to somehow get normal lives together in these very abnormal situations. The movie, to use a title to borrow a title on my part, that's been used more than once in the movie, the movie is sort of about love among the ruins, and it's primarily love between these two women, young women, but it's a troubled love, and it's a discombobulated love in a very troubled and discombobulated time and place. Now, the main thing about Beanpole, I mean, the story is very absorbing and it's marvelously well acted. But the main thing about it, as was the case with Invisible Life, is the way in which the story is told. It's a slowly unfolding story. It's a brooding story. It's a story full of mood and atmosphere. And you have to sort of sink into that and appreciate that. Now, don't get me wrong. The story moves along. It's a very involving and suspenseful story in a lot of ways, especially when Masha decides that she wants to have another child, and we find out that she's probably not capable, because of physical injuries suffered in the war, of having another child. So various complications like that ensue along the way. And the story, well, let's just say it's a very gripping story in a lot of ways. But the style of the movie, the way in which it's told, is really its main selling point. It's a very major Russian film at a time when we don't get an enormous number of major Russian films on American screens. And I'm just delighted that all three of these international movies are being released in the United States. But Beanpole is probably the one that's received the most enthusiastic notices from the critics who have written about it so far. It's a beautifully made movie, a real fine example of first-rate cinematic craft, but it's also just really terrifically acted and a very, very interesting story, very interestingly told. So now turning to our final movie for this week, Jill, we come to an Israeli film. Quite a number of Israeli films have been reaching America lately, I'm happy to report, and this one is a very, very good one. So this starts off back in 1993. It's not a documentary, but it deals with some very, very real situations. Back in 1993, the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, signed the Oslo Accords, and the idea was, and by the way, this is back in the news again. We now have Trump's so-called peace plan, which is supposed to achieve peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So we're now dealing with way back in 1993 when there was another big push toward this. And yes, Rabin signed the Oslo Accords, and now we were supposed to get lasting peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So this was very controversial back in Israel in 1993. A lot of people didn't like this. And this is not a documentary, this film. It's a dramatic film, but it's based very much on real occurrences. And we meet a young man named Yigal, who is a law student, and he is a very, very serious Orthodox Jew, and he totally believes that the territory of Israel was granted to the Israelis by the word of God, and that it is completely wrong that anything should be ceded to the Palestinians for any reason whatever. And he then becomes not only an activist, but a violent activist. He basically starts to recruit people to put together a militia, and he wants to somehow do something about these Oslo Accords and about the whole question of Yitzhak Rabin, who he feels is betraying his country. And he comes upon something which he learns coming from the very ancient Jewish law called the law of the pursuer. And I've actually seen this movie more than once. And the way it unfolds in the movie, the idea of exactly what the law of the pursuer is, this ancient law, exactly what it is, seems a little bit murky. And I think this is on purpose because I think it's a little bit murky in the mind of Yigal Amir himself. I don't think he quite understands this, but he totally believes that it justifies any action that might be taken to prevent these Oslo Accords from going forward and to prevent Yitzhak Rabin from doing more of what Yigal Amir regards as terrible damage to the Jewish people and to the whole way that things are supposed to be under God's law and earth. So what this is all building up to, and we find this out at the very beginning of the movie, so this is not a spoiler, it leads up to the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Yes, Yigal Amir ultimately assassinates him, and that is the absolute last thing that happens in the movie. I mean, like in the last 30 seconds. So we begin the movie by knowing that Yitzhak Rabin will be assassinated, and at the end of this approximately 2-hour movie, Yitzhak Rabin is in fact assassinated, and what we have all in between, over the course of 2 hours, is the building up to that as we see Yigal Amir formulating his plans, putting together these notions of his, and moving toward this horrible act of almost apocalyptic violence. Now, one of the really remarkable things about Incitement, and one of the great achievements of the filmmaker, Yaron Zilberman, is that it actually is tremendously suspenseful, tremendously involving, tremendously engrossing, even though we know exactly how it's going to turn out. And what we're watching is the step-by-step process of this young man, this young misguided man, formulating his ideas, formulating his plans, developing them step by step, and moving closer and closer to the horrible act of violence. And we also see how things from his personal life, what we may call his personal life, play into this too. Women, for example, romance, relationships with friends, looking for mentors who might encourage him in this and help him in this, and also peers who he tries to inveigle into his plans and persuade of the rightness of his plans, and sometimes he finds that's all too easy to accomplish. So it's a really remarkable achievement. I found Incitement just really quite a remarkable movie, mainly for what I just said. I found it tremendously suspenseful, gripping, as we watch. By the way, it's marvelously acted. As we watch things move along what we know is a predetermined course. And the fact that that predetermined course is predetermined makes it all in more involvement. It's like watching a tightly wound spring uncoil. We know exactly how the uncoiling will take place, but it's the details details that matter. It's the tension that matters. It's the suspense that matters. So these are three films all of which I really, really enjoyed watching. I am so pleased to be seeing such tremendously well-made international movies reach American screens. And with that moment of celebration, I will just say that is my somewhat international story this week, Jill.
Thank you very much, David Sterritt. Films in Focus, the films Invisible Life, Beanpole, and Incitement.